Special thanks to Rosetta Stone for sponsoring today's video. So, there's a lot to look forward to when it comes to the 1000-Year Blood War Arc anime Part 4. Incredible fights, long-awaited bankai reveals, and of course all of the brand new content that's likely to be added in this final core. In fact, I just made a video on that. But there's one aspect of the final act of the story that I'm perhaps the most excited, and certainly, shall we say, curious to see. One aspect that was, frankly, a huge, unmitigated disappointment in the manga. And that's, of course, Uryū ISHIDA versus JUGRAM Haschwalth. The truth is, this should be, without a doubt, one of the arc's absolute biggest, most important fights. The heir to the Vandenreich and one of Ichigo's closest friends, Uryū ISHIDA, has just been unmasked as a traitor, capping off an entire subplot, and is now holding Haschwalth off as Ichigo, Orihime and Chad now make for Yhwach's throne room. Meanwhile, on the other side, Haschwalth is Yhwach's proclaimed first son, his other half, and the Grand Master of the Sternritter, the only member of the Quincy Empire it seems really to suspect Uryū's true motives, even after he successfully won over the Schutzstaffel. For an arc dedicated to the Quincy, well, this should be really as big as it gets. Outside of Yhwach, these are probably the two most important Quincy in the arc, sorry Ryūken, and it's at last time for them to face off in a fight to the death at the very end of the war. Except, well, despite building to this confrontation for the majority of Uryū's subplot, their fight feels like it never actually gets started. I mean, it does, literally, to a degree, but it's honestly like nothing else I have ever seen in Bleach. It's a perfect storm of weirdness. It's absolutely one of the weirdest battles not just of the arc, but of the entire series, especially considering the prominence of its two combatants, and as a result is one of, if not the arc's, single worst fight. And I don't say that lightly. But why? What makes this fight so disappointing, and how did it happen? There are a number of reasons, which we'll get into, but crucially Uryū versus Haschwalth, essentially the penultimate fight of the entire series, carrying with it the weight of massive fan expectation, was an enormous letdown in the source material, and the anime now has a huge opportunity to put it right. So, in today's video, we're going to take a look at Uryū versus Haschwalth as it was presented in the manga, and envision what the anime could do differently. What new content are they likely to add here, and is there anything about the original fight that actually works? Let's find out. However, before we get started on the video, guys, of course, there will be major spoilers for the end of the 1000-Year Blood War arc in the video to come, so beware if you haven't read the manga, and make sure to hit subscribe if you enjoyed today's video as well. I really do appreciate all of the support in getting the channel to its next major milestone of 300,000 subs. So if you did enjoy this video, consider hitting subscribe. I really would appreciate it. And check out my second channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, where I just uploaded a reaction to the reveal trailer for the Nintendo Switch 2 as it dropped. If you're a fan of my Bleach live reactions, you'll probably get a kick out of this one as well. It was a lot of fun seeing the new console for the first time, so I'd appreciate you going and checking that video out. You'll find the link in the description and the pinned comment and on my channel in general, and consider giving a subscribe over there too. We're trying to reach 10,000 subs, and again, I just really would appreciate all of your support. Regardless of whether you subscribe or not, I'm grateful you're here. Before we get started on the video itself, however, guys, first, a word from today's sponsor. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2025, the year you learn a new language. Truthfully, there's no better time to get started on your New Year's resolutions than right now, and learning a new language is incredibly valuable. I'm still working on my Japanese, and this year, I want to reach the next milestone in my journey with the help of Rosetta Stone. A trip to Japan is still on the cards for Jade and I, and we've made getting conversation ready in Japanese a goal for 2025. And the Rosetta Stone app is helping us to achieve that. If you've ever tried to learn a language before and found yourself burning out over time, Rosetta Stone's different approach to language learning is the answer. Short, 10-minute long lessons means your learning works for you, and with the app in your pocket at all times, your learning becomes 100% on the go, and 100% available whenever you need it. Looking to boost your learning at the end of the day? It's as easy as a quick lesson straight from your phone. And the coolest thing about Rosetta Stone is the level of interactivity it provides, seamlessly making it a core part of your learning experience. Rather than the tired traditions usually associated with monotonous language learning, Rosetta Stone employs a dynamic immersion approach, helping you to retain more through engaging hands-on activities and even simulated conversation with natural speakers. Onna no koto uma. So, if you're thinking of learning a new language as a resolution this year, try Rosetta Stone. When you visit the link in my description, the Lifetime 25 Languages offer is currently 60% off until January 31st, giving you lifetime access to all 25 languages available on the app. And when they say it's lifetime access, they mean it. Get started on your language journey in 2025. Alright, so let's start with a brief look at the fight itself and how it plays out in the manga. Believe me when I say that it won't take particularly long. The duel between Uryū and Haschwalth technically runs from chapter 661, which is where Cour 3 of the anime came to an end recently, and doesn't wrap up until chapter 681, effectively spanning almost exactly 2 entire volumes of Bleach. 20 chapters is a pretty beefy amount of time for any one fight, and I think that as a result, this might be the longest running of any of the battles of Varvelt, though obviously things get pretty messy where the early stages of the war against Gerard is concerned. And yet, despite chugging along in the background for all of that time, do you know how many chapters are actually afforded to this fight? Out of the space of 20 chapters, Uryū vs Haschwalth makes up a resounding 2 of them, and neither of them are full chapters either. In fact, Uryū vs Haschwalth is 2 chapters long after having the disparate bits and pieces of their fight stitched together. So, let's begin then. In chapter 661, Uryū's true motivations have been revealed, and Haschwalth confronts him with the Almighty active. Realizing Yūharbak is now vulnerable, Uryū tells Ichigo and the others to head to the throne room. After his friends escape, Uryū stays behind to hold off the Grand Master, and the 2 of them ready their weapons and prepare for battle. Haschwalth has been waiting for this moment for Uryū to slip up, for the mask to finally fall, and now he has him exactly where he wants him. After this, fast forward all the way to chapter 672. By this point in the story, the remaining Schutzstaffel fights against both Askin and Gerard are, for all intents and purposes, over. Now, this isn't particularly unusual. A lot of times in Bleach, fights get started, Kubo sets up a battle at some point within the arc, and then it continues later on after a gap where, say, other fights have finished in its place, and then that fight gets its full continuation. What makes this one so unusual is that although we do skip ahead to the continuation of this fight, it is never continued in full. Anyway, this leaves only the battles against Yūharbak and Haschwalth left to complete, but we've also only got 14 chapters left to wrap this entire thing up. So you'd best believe one of these fights is getting left out in the cold, and it won't be the one involving the main character. In chapter 672, we see that dawn has broken on a new day as Haschwalth deflects an oncoming arrow with his sword. With the sunrise, Haschwalth has lost the Almighty once again, meaning Ichigo and his friends don't even make it to Yūharbak before the king reawakens, making this whole diversion thing that was set up in 661 utterly pointless. We see that although Uryū has survived the night, he is seriously wounded, but Haschwalth remarks that he didn't want to kill him during the night anyway, as his own power is much more suited for battle than his Majesty's. Presumably this means that Haschwalth can't use the balance while he has the Almighty, but to be honest I feel they are both pretty well suited for battle regardless. And actually I'm not sure that makes sense, because isn't Yūharbak supposed to be asleep when Haschwalth kills Kangdu and BG9, and he quite clearly uses the balance there. Anyway, Haschwalth swings his sword at Uryū, unleashing an arc of energy as we cut away again. And get used to cutting away just as something starts to happen in this fight. That's how almost the entire thing plays out. Also, let's just address this for a moment. We've barely moved a few chapters and there's already some weirdness. How is Haschwalth able to unleash an energy blast from his sword? We never see him do it again, and he's supposedly unable to gather reishi. Though maybe he could have learned how to over the last 1,000 years, I guess, or maybe it's a facet of the balance. Maybe he is sending out some misfortune. I've got absolutely no idea. Anyway, moving on to chapter 673, Uryū senses Ichigo's arrival in the throne room. Then in chapter 674, Uryū is suddenly on death's door once again, this time now collapsed on the ground in a puddle of blood. Haschwalth approaches him, talking to his fallen foe about balancing oneself on their own scales, but as a bloodied and bruised Uryū slowly gets to his feet once again, he conjures a brand new bow before vowing to defeat Haschwalth. As chapter 675 begins, we actually continue with this fight. We get a better look at Uryū, and it's clear he sustained a pretty serious wound to his shoulder, which is why he was down for the count in the previous chapter. As Uryū draws his new bow, he and Haschwalth begin to chat once again, with Haschwalth alluding to the true power of the Almighty, accessible only by Yūharbak himself. As Haschwalth reveals with a sinister smirk that the real terror of the Almighty isn't in its power to see the future, he approaches Uryū with his sword outstretched, for some reason casually saying that he'll tell him all about the Almighty when the fight is over, as though he's not planning on killing him. As Haschwalth readies his blade, he tells Uryū to put all that he is onto the balance, and as Haschwalth swings his sword, we cut away again. We don't return to the battle between Uryū and Haschwalth now until chapter 679, where, you guessed it, Uryū has been knocked down off-screen once again. This time, clutching his new bow, he's now sustained a chest injury too, and is slumped on some debris. Clearly something major has happened during this period, as Haschwalth is now wielding his frund shield and explains his shrift to Uryū. As Haschwalth notes that Uryū is likely finished, Uryū decides to reveal his own shrift, the antithesis. Remember that in the source material, this was the only time Uryū ever used this power, and in a shocking turn of events, he reverses his and Haschwalth's injuries, Haschwalth himself suddenly covered in serious, bloody wounds, while Uryū is now unharmed and standing on his feet once more. As blood gushes out of Haschwalth's body, he muses that yes, perhaps this power is the reason that Yūharbak took an interest in Uryū. Perhaps this very power means that Uryū is the only one capable of challenging the Almighty. Learning this, Uryū attempts to rush to help Ichigo, but Haschwalth uses the balance to inflict damage back upon Uryū, causing him to crumple to the ground once more. As Haschwalth uses his frund shield to dispense even more misfortune upon Uryū, the Grandmaster's wounds are healed once again, and they find themselves back in the same position they were at the start of the chapter. Inexplicably, Uryū does not use his shrift again. Instead, he crawls along the floor as Haschwalth approaches him. Lifting his sword above his head, Haschwalth prepares to kill Uryū. Now, this is where I remember thinking that Ryūken was almost certainly going to show up and intervene in the fight. However, that doesn't happen. Instead, in the following chapter, we see that Uryū has simply just rolled over to avoid Haschwalth's sword strike, which is not only hilarious, but frankly absurd. As Uryū and Haschwalth discuss the value of friendship and bonds, Uryū enrages the Grandmaster by forcing him to confront some hard truths about his own decisions in life. Lifting his sword above his head once more, Haschwalth demands that Uryū forsake his life in response, when Haschwalth is suddenly struck by Yūharbak's Auswählen as the Quincy King makes his escape above, stripping Haschwalth of all of his power and life force in an instant. In chapter 681, the fight comes to a somber end as Haschwalth collapses to the ground. Nearing death, he tells Uryū to transfer his wounds to him before leaving, as he believes, thinking back to the decisions that he made as a child, that Uryū should go and help his friend, even if it won't make a difference in the end. And so yeah, that's it. That's literally the entire fight summed up. The whole battle is a series of false starts. Every single time you think something is about to happen, we cut away to a different scene. Every single time we return, Uryū has been seriously injured in one way or another with no word of explanation. The only sequence where the fight is given any sustained panel coverage sees Uryū and Haschwalth trading blows, not with weapons or anything like that, but with their shrift, both of which are nebulous at best, visually non-existent, and amount to them just flipping a switch essentially, reversing things back and forth in a very unsatisfying way, in a way that could feasibly have carried on endlessly and only doesn't because, well, there's just no reason given, and Uryū had to lose. So, how did this happen? Up until now, the Varvelt arc fights have all been uniformly good, I would say, with some even reaching the heights of excellent. Although uneven in places, each of the fights against the Schutzstaffel have a decent amount of time afforded to them, and almost all of them bring something new and interesting to the table in various different ways. Whether that's an in-depth flashback, brand new abilities, interesting fight choreography, or hell, even a combination of all of the above in some instances. This fight has absolutely none of that. It's a smokescreen to hide the fact that there is nothing really going on here. Obviously, this close to the end of the series, it is clear that Kubo was under immense pressure and on a timer, with his own personal health at perhaps its lowest point ever, and a desire to wrap the series up before he became, frankly, seriously ill. And, well, it sadly means that something had to give. And with Ichigo and Orihime versus Yūharbak already underway, well, that was the natural point to focus on. That fight gets about the same amount of coverage as the previous Schutzstaffel battles, certainly the Askin and Gerard fights, especially if you include the actual final battle as well, which mostly just feels like an extension of Ichigo versus Yūharbak to begin with. On top of that, though, there's always the possibility that Kubo just felt like there wasn't much to offer here. Remember, as a special Quincy who gives power, Haschwalth shouldn't technically have access to any Quincy abilities at all, aside from his shrift of course. He's just an extremely talented and disciplined swordsman, and maybe Kubo didn't think there was much value in showing him carving up Uryū. But I mean, I don't know about that, and I've always found the idea that there is this red line that simply says that Haschwalth cannot perform any Quincy abilities whatsoever to be a little bit iffy in my opinion. I know his flashback with bazz-b of course shows him as being unable to do that, unable to conjure reishi to create a bow, anything like that, but I don't think there's anything to say that in the last 1,000 years he couldn't have learnt how to do something. Of course, Yūharbak is a bit of a special case, but ultimately he is a Quincy cut from the same cloth as Haschwalth. They are of the same ilk, as Yūharbak himself says, and although Yūharbak is of course considerably older and more powerful, he can perform Quincy techniques, whether it's conjuring gigantic arrows, or blasting volleys of exploding arrows, or Sankt Alter, Sankt Swinger, all of that sort of thing. Yūharbak can do it. So I would have no qualms with Haschwalth whipping out some Quincy techniques, not necessarily on that level, but for the anime to give us a bit of a loophole that says actually, yeah, he can do this after X amount of training. But also, on a different path, as seen with his Frun shield, there is something innately interesting, I think, about seeing someone with that kind of physical talent having to not only survive, but also come out on top against ostensibly much more powerful and capable figures. And I like the idea that Haschwalth employs gadgets and items in combat to make up that gap, in the same way that Quincy used to use things like Jinto earlier in the series. But of course it's not just about Haschwalth. Uryū himself was robbed of his final fight, though that's already a little different here in the anime, where Uryū has been given multiple new battles in Cour 3. And so that brings me nicely to the next point. Has the anime done anything differently already in regards to this fight? Well, like I mentioned, while the anime hasn't changed the lead-in to this fight too much, it has made big alterations to Uryū's storyline that might play into his upcoming battle with Haschwalth. For example, his Quincy Vollständig is perhaps the biggest, most conspicuous change of the lot, and will almost certainly be used in battle with the Grand Master. In the manga, Uryū was never even hinted at having a holy form, whereas here in the anime, not only does he have one, but it's pretty fully fleshed out, I'd say, with its own unique moveset, and to top things off, it's actually been used very effectively in a few fights already, as Uryū has been given numerous new battles as of Cour 3, one against Senjumaru, one against Renji, and 2 against Ichigo. Now, the Quincy Vollständig is perhaps the most obvious change, as I said, but there are a couple of additions in the anime that might affect the fight in more subtle ways. For example, the anime has done away with Uryū's half-hearted master plan, which revolved around him scattering chips all over Vollständig, which he then effectively would detonate, diffusing the entire structure. Here, that is all gone, and the anime has hinted at something bigger in regards to Uryū's scheme now, something that connects him to both his mother, his grandfather, and even Yhwach's Auswählen. Something in his blood that may enable him to defeat the Quincy King once and for all. This isn't like the manga, where Haschwalth alluded to the idea that the antithesis might be able to overcome the Almighty's true nature, and then nothing ever came of it. Here, everything seems to be tying back into whatever the truth is at the heart of Uryū's survival all those years ago. But there's more too. The anime has even gone so far as to hint that Uryū might have some form of the Almighty himself, with his eyes flashing red during his battle with Senjumaru. Meanwhile, conversely, Haschwalth's eyes flashed blue while he was wielding the Almighty during the start of his confrontation with Uryū in episode 40, implying a loss of control for whatever reason. So that brings me to the final point. What can the anime do differently to fix this fight? And what does fixing this fight even really look like? Well, I think it's clear from my breakdown of the fight as it appears in the manga that essentially a complete and total rewrite is necessary in order to get the most out of this battle's potential. That being said, there are aspects of this fight that I do quite like, certain elements that I wouldn't mind them keeping, which I'll discuss at the end. But, for argument's sake, let's say that here, fixing this fight simply means getting it up to a quality level that's on par with the other Schutzstaffel battles. Because right now, it is clear that this fight is by far and away the weakest of the entire Vollständig arc. There's no question in my mind, even with the messiness of something like Gerard's showdown to contend with, at least a fight actually takes place on screen. Now this, in a sense, is the complete opposite of the Gerard fight. This should be an intimate duel between two Quincies who are very much mirror images of one another, with Haschwalth clearly supposed to reflect Uryū, while bazz-b is meant to be an embodiment of Ichigo. But in their reality, Haschwalth chose his king over his friend, resulting in his friend's eventual brutal death. Before we get into the individual components of the fight that should be here in some form, there are a couple of points from the manga's narrative that need to be utilised much better here. The manga toyed with the idea of Uryū battling Haschwalth while the Grand Master had the power of the Almighty, but ultimately it was completely skipped over and amounted to nothing. And then of course there's also this idea of Uryū being the successor to the Vandenreich, something that was implied to have caused some friction for Haschwalth especially, but again, nothing comes of it. Here in the anime's version of their fight, this needs to come to a head in a big way, and it can do so by combining those two plot points, resulting in a tug of war for power between the two of them. With Yūhabak asleep, perhaps he is subconsciously giving Uryū, his heir, more control over the Mask of the Ruler, which then rips away some of Haschwalth's own command of the Almighty at crucial junctures of the battle. I truly wouldn't be surprised, for example, if we see them both with one red eye each at some point during their fight, as they both literally and figuratively wrestle for control of the Empire and the power of the king. I also just don't think it makes any sense for Uryū to be so completely out of his depth against Haschwalth either. Sure, Haschwalth is almost certainly the more skilled fighter, but the Uryū we've seen so far in the anime has proven himself as a monster in his own right, and fundamentally, I just think it would make for a more interesting and satisfying fight if he's capable of holding his own. Here's the thing. In order to succeed, the fight needs to be the primary focus of its own screen time. We can't keep cutting away like in the manga. It dilutes the entire thing and removes the fight's own agency. By removing those constant cuts, we remove the jarring visuals of Uryū suddenly appearing more and more beaten up without having achieved anything. And so that leads me to another point. This fight needs to be given the requisite time it deserves. Uryū vs Haschwalth should have no less than 2 full episodes dedicated to it. The same length of time as Mayuri vs Pernida and Kyoraku vs Leal. They were given that much due to the number of chapters their fights took in the manga, and it's insane to me to think that based on the chapter count of Uryū vs Haschwalth as we worked out earlier in the video, it would take up, when added all together, maybe the first 5 minutes of one episode. That has to be changed. There has to be a substantial amount of new content in this fight, enough to get it to the screen time of those other battles. Screen time might sound like a superfluous factor to take into consideration when fixing a fight, but it's all part of the plan to sort out the fight's structure. If push really came to shove and time was really being squeezed, one full episode dedicated to this fight wouldn't be too bad, at least in terms of how many chapters they normally cover. You'd probably be looking at doubling the chapter count, if not nearly tripling it, but I'd ideally like a little more to really give it its dues. Now, one of the major components of the more successful Schutzstaffel fights is an in-depth flashback that helps add weight to the battle overall, and I think we'll see that. This seems like the perfect vehicle for the flashback that reveals the truth behind Uryū's survival, what happened to Katagiri, and of course everything that leads up to the eventual meeting between Uryū and Haschwalth that saw the beginnings of Uryū's plan to infiltrate this Quincy empire. Another major element of these fights is the idea of being able to rely on someone else, or someone else coming in to assist the main fighter against an insurmountable enemy. With Haschwalth proving too much for Uryū to deal with, it would be really cool to see his father Ryūken arrive at the halfway point of the battle, and the father and son duo taking on the Grand Master together, an envoy for the spirit of Soken's defiance. Speaking of Quincy Vollständig, is it possible for Ryūken to have one? That would be a crowd-pleasing reveal for sure. Or maybe, to go really crazy, to go another step further, what if Ryūken uses another of Soken's Sanrei gloves to use Let's Steal and lose all of his Quincy powers? I mean, he doesn't really like being a Quincy anyway. That would be an interesting way to round off his arc, while honouring his father's memory. But I think it would be especially cool to finally get the ultimate Quincy battle that we've always wanted to see. These divine angelic figures fighting all at once. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's technically possible for Haschwalth to have a Vollständig, but if the anime wants to bend the rules, or if Kubo himself has come up with a loophole to make it happen, I certainly wouldn't say no, as long as it was explained well. Maybe upon killing bazz-b, Haschwalth subconsciously took back all of the power he had been unintentionally feeding his friend over the years, and it awoke his own abilities. I have no idea, but to see 3 angels battling it out would be awesome. Either way, I don't want to see these fighters just relying solely on their shrift. Uryū's the antithesis and Haschwalth's the balance. While powerful, just aren't that interesting, to me at least, and really should be reserved for one massive pendulum swing moment. The rest of the time, I'd love to see Uryū actually fighting like a Quincy, with their tools and their tricks. He doesn't use his shrift at all in his fights with Ichigo and Renji, so that's the kind of Uryū I want to see here too. Now, to be fair, while the anime hasn't come out and said what Uryū's shrift is yet, it has explicitly shown it being used numerous times, whereas like I said, in the manga the first time we ever saw it was in battle against Haschwalth, so maybe that sequence will also be changed here in the anime too, as it won't hold quite the same shock factor this time around. Now you might be wondering, are there any aspects of this fight that I actually enjoyed, that I actually think work? And well, yeah, there's a few. I like the central through line, Uryū and Haschwalth's ongoing thematic discussion about balancing one's life choices upon a scale and weighing them to see who they truly are. Their differing viewpoints on what makes a relationship valuable and what it should mean to dedicate yourself to someone. Haschwalth has a very warped view of relationships, which is unsurprising given his upbringing, but he believes that you should only align yourself with those who being around benefits you in some literal way, some quantifiable way. In a somewhat meta sense, Haschwalth mentions to Uryū that he likely grew more in the instant Yhwach gave him power than he did across all the years of friendship that he spent with Ichigo and the others. Therefore, it's not them he should be fighting for, but Yhwach that he should be risking his life for. And while that's technically true, of course Uryū values his bonds of friendship over a quick and easy path to power, something that strikes a nerve with Haschwalth. The decision to turn his back on bazz-b was Haschwalth's to make, though it's becoming clearer and clearer the more Uryū talks to him that Haschwalth regrets it. So I like all of that. And I also like Haschwalth's death. While Gerard being struck and killed by the Auswählen feels very unsatisfying, for Haschwalth it actually feels kind of perfect. Despite his delusions, it just goes to show that the first son was no different in Yhwach's eyes than the rest of the sternritter, and he gave everything for his king, only to have his life stolen away in the end. It kind of feels like he gets what he deserves in a sense, and it works really well in my eyes. That being said, there is a fundamental change that I would make to the end of this battle, and that's that Uryū should be winning this thing by the end. In the manga, Haschwalth once again has Uryū bloodied and on his knees and is about to kill him, but in the anime, Uryū should have already overcome the Grand Master and won on his own merit, on his own terms, with his own strength. What makes the Auswählen feel so cheap in the manga is that it's a deus ex machina. It comes out of nowhere, quite literally from the heavens above, to rescue Uryū from an opponent he can't defeat. But if Uryū, perhaps with Ryūken's aid, defeated Haschwalth on his own, then the Auswählen isn't so much of a problem, for this fight anyway. Perhaps Uryū chooses to spare the beaten Haschwalth, and the Grand Master, enraged by Uryū's words on friendship, prepares to attack his foe from behind, only to be blasted by the Auswählen in that moment. But for ostensibly Uryū's final ever battle in the series, he really deserves to win it himself. Alright guys, but that's it for today's video. That's my breakdown of Uryū versus Haschwalth in regards to how I think the anime should go about trying to fix this thoroughly broken fight. Honestly, most of the fights in the Varvelt arc are pretty damn good, but Uryū versus Haschwalth is a massive disappointment, and I'm really hoping that this is one of the areas they focus on in Cour 4. This is a chance for Kubo to oversee this fight and have it play out in the way he originally wanted it to go. So I am expecting some pretty hefty changes here, but I'd love to know what you think of my thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think of my ideas for how to fix this fight, to how to change it? Do you agree? Do you not? I'd love to hear your own thoughts and theories on how this fight could be transformed in the anime down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, I hope you took something of value away from this video as well. Make sure to go and check out my latest video over on Mr. Tomo Talks Games. I really would appreciate all of your support and help over there as I try and get this channel off the ground. We just reacted to the reveal trailer for the Nintendo Switch 2, and again, like I said, if you enjoy my Bleach anime live reactions, I think you'll get a kick out of this one as well. So go check it out, give it some love. I really, really would appreciate it. But once again, thank you so very much for watching. As always, I want to end this video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. Your support really does mean the absolute world to me, especially during January, where ad revenue does kind of collapse a little bit here on YouTube. It really does make the absolute difference. And frankly, I couldn't do it without you. So thank you so, so very much. If you also want to support me over on Patreon, if you enjoy what I do here on YouTube, make sure to go and hit that link down in the description below. At the $1 tier a month, you can get your name in the credits of every single video like this. At the $2 tier or higher, you can enjoy all of my videos absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Alright guys, once again, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.